You're listening to the Thrive Podcast, where every week we dive into a practical, tactical tip to bring you from a life of simply surviving to thriving. It's personal development for the everyday girl who is done with coasting through her days, done with feeling like she's missing out on the deeper meaning of her own life, and done with mediocrity once and for all. Because it's not enough to simply survive. You deserve to thrive. Welcome back to Thrive. In today's episode, I'm having a conversation with Stephanie Berryman, a leadership coach and consultant, and an Amazon best-selling author who knows all about reducing stress and increasing productivity, especially in really high-pressure jobs or challenging family situations. She just came out with her new book, Working Well, 12 Simple Strategies to Manage Stress and Increase Productivity. So she's truly a perfect guest and expert on helping us all thrive more at work and beyond. So be sure to stay tuned through this episode, drop us your thoughts on social media, and without further ado, welcome Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Erica. It's great to be here.
So I'm so happy to have you here on Thrive, all the way from Australia. We were just talking before how it's winter there and summer here, so it's kind of crazy. And it's Tuesday for you, I think, right now, and it's Monday for me. So we're like in other worlds right now. So I love that we can come together on the internet and have this conversation. So why don't you kick us off with a bit of your backstory and how you came to be where you are today, because you have such an interesting background and expertise, and I think this is going to be such a helpful conversation for everybody listening in.
Thanks. Well, my career path has certainly been a bit of a winding road. I was one of those people that did the 10-year degree plan. So I did a couple of years of university and then just thought, no, I don't want to do that. So I spent my 20s traveling internationally and leading wilderness trips and working with youth. And then by the end of my 20s, I was like, I think I need a little more stability and a bit of a paycheck. And so I went to Teachers College, and about 2 weeks before I turned 30, I graduated from Teachers College with a ton of debt and some certainty that I never, ever wanted to teach. You want to talk about a stressful job? Wow. So I was lucky enough to get work at a not-for-profit, the Canadian Mental Health Association. So I was their director of public education. And it was a big job. It was my first job managing staff. I had 10 staff, 5 of whom lived with persistent and severe mental illness. So it was really challenging to run my programs and manage staff and figure all this stuff out. And I was also out teaching a lot, right? So I would be out teaching courses on how to manage your stress, ironically, when I was super stressed out from my own job. And I'll fully admit that at that point, I was not living the strategies that I was teaching. So, I would teach like, okay, meditation is really good. But I'd be like, oh, but it's so weird and it's so boring and I just can't get into it and, get enough sleep. But I was like, but I'm too busy. And, it was one of those situations where I was in a super high stress job, but I wasn't really taking care of myself or doing the things that I knew I was supposed to be doing. And I'm sure many of us can relate to that, where it's like, yeah, I know if I do these things, it'll be really good for me, but it gets hard to do them.
Story of my life.
And then my mom, who had had health issues for most of her life, she got quite sick. And because she was living in Mexico at the time, my uncle was down there visiting her, and he called me and he said, there's something wrong with your mom. I don't know what is wrong with her, but I'm sending her to Vancouver. This is your problem now. You sort it out. So long story short, after a few heartbreaking months of just trying to figure out what was going on with her, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
Oh.
So I was like working a super stressful job, and I now had a super stressful family situation, and I was single. The rest of my family was living in Saskatchewan. So it became a really, really stressful time. And the stress started impacting me. So I was having trouble concentrating at work. I was getting these weird chest pains, right? I had to go in for an EKG, and everything was totally fine. So I knew it was stress related. I couldn't sleep. I was getting really tired. And then, because I was working in mental health and I was hearing all these stories, I also knew that stress was like a precursor to a mental illness. So I realized that if I didn't start to take some action, I was going to have some serious either physical or mental health issues. And I knew that if I went down, this program and the work that I was so passionate about was all going to come apart, There wouldn't be anyone to take care of my mom. Like it became really important to start taking care of myself. So that's what I did. I started using some of the strategies that I was teaching. And they helped a lot, right? I realized, oh, this is really good stuff. The research says it's good stuff, but actually when I'm doing it, it's working. So, through those 3 long years of my mom's illness, through her passing away, that's the strategies were what really carried me through and helped me manage all the stress that came from that. So that's kind of how I came to start to learn and use the strategies. And then about 10 years ago, I decided that I didn't want to just work with people after they were stressed out. I wanted to be a bit more proactive and actually help people manage their stress before it became such a big issue. So I went back and I did my master's in leadership. And I started my own business and, started teaching people how to communicate more effectively, how to manage the stress in their relationships, how to reduce the stress in their job, how to be more productive. So that was kind of the path that I took to get to where I've landed today. It's a very circuitous path.
Love it though, because it's so relevant to people listening to the Thrive podcast. Because I always say we're kind of striving to go here from a life of simply surviving to thriving, which is like exactly what you do. It's like you help everybody get from their ho-hum of everyday working life to being more proactive and preventative with things that will probably inevitably come up in work, in family. We all get stressed out. We all know the feeling. And we all could probably use a little bit more productivity here and there as well. So this is like the perfect synthesis here for everybody listening to really kind of take control of something important in life.
Oh, that's great. And I do, I really love what I get to do because it is that difference, right? When, someone comes to you and they're super stressed out and they're struggling and they're hating their life. And then to be able to really work with people and give them strategies and see the strategies work and see people, I had one client who, she went from she was working till 10 every night. She was never seeing her husband. She'd lost most of her friendships. She was so stressed out and she wasn't even getting her work done, right? It was like, just go, go, go. And, through our work together, she started getting more work done during her days. She realized that working till 10 every night was actually making her less productive. She started, and what I loved was she started making dates with her friends to force her to leave work, right? So it's like finding those little ways to get us out of our habits and our patterns and into something that's better for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we get our lives back.
Exactly. So talk to us about stress, because at its core, what is it? Like kind of break it down for us, and how does our body react to it? What are maybe its long-term effects if we don't pay attention to it and manage it properly? Because I mean, you're the expert here, and I think we all hear stress. Oh, I'm so stressed. But can you break it down so that people really understand what it is and why it's so important that we be proactive about paying attention to it and harnessing it in our lives?
For sure. I mean, stress is what I find really interesting about stress is that stress isn't defined by the events or the circumstances that we experience. It's defined by how we respond to it. So, if you look up the dictionary definition of stress, it will say it's a mental or emotional state in response to events or circumstances. And to me, that's where all our power lies, is stressful things happen, but it's how we respond to them that will kind of make or break our situation, right? So, in my situation, the stress wasn't my mom's Alzheimer's. The stress was my emotional response to that. So when we can shift our emotional response or we can shift our mental state, then we get our stress under control, no matter what's going on. There can be 18 super stressful things going on in our lives, but we can actually be calm and at ease in the midst of that if we've got the right mindset. So I think that, what I find super fascinating about the research on stress and in terms of how it impacts our health is that it's our stress response that impacts our health, not what's actually happening to us. So, a study published in the Washington Post a few years ago, they found that people who perceive their everyday hassles as very stressful, they had the same mortality rates as people who were going through really stressful events.
Wow.
So how a person perceives their stress and reacts to it emotionally, that's what was associated with the increased risk for heart disease and for death. So to me, that's such a key piece, right? Is we need to figure out how do we respond to the stressful events in our lives. Because as you said, stress is going to happen, right? That's not going to go away. Stress is a very natural part of living in the modern day world. And, I think if this year has shown us anything, it's that there's a lot of stressful things happening that are completely beyond our control. So where our power lies is in our ability to choose how we respond to those things. And, what I often say to people is like, we're hardwired to get super stressed out. That's like the neuroscience, right? It's how our brains work. And the reason is, if our brains see a risk or a threat, they think that's a lion, it's going to come and eat me, right? So we kind of go into that place of being really highly stressed, but we need to, kind of take a step back and calm the brain down and say, that's not actually a lion. Like that difficult coworker there, that's not a lion. That's not enough of a reason to get highly, highly stressed out. So, I think, and I've certainly fallen into the trap too, right? It can be really easy, especially when we're already at a bit of an elevated stress state, for us to get super stressed about those little things, right? Where it's like, oh my God, I'm gonna miss this deadline at work, or I've lost my keys, or like my coworker's being difficult, or my kids are being nightmares. And we have these huge stress responses to that, but that has such negative effects on our health, on our mental health. So, what I really work with people on is you can't control anything that happens around you, but what you can control is how you respond to it. So, and I know that you asked about, how stress shows up in the body, right? And one of the things I always ask my clients to do is recognize your own unique indicators that you're stressed, right? Because each one of us has, an indication, right? So for some people, it might be that they get really bad headaches. For a lot of people, it can be that they're having trouble sleeping, right? So it's really difficult to fall asleep or to stay asleep. Some people get sore neck, sore shoulders. For me, it's the back. That's when I get stressed. I know it's my back is starting to get a bit sore. A lot of people get digestive issues. And then, of course, there's also the kind of the personality stuff, right? So people can be a little bit more irritable. They can have trouble concentrating. I think a lot of times we start to take these things as normal. But if we can actually pay attention and notice when those signs are showing up, stress is just like any other illness, right? If we catch it early, that's when we can reverse the effects, and it's a lot easier to reverse the effects. So I always recommend notice what are your, even make a little list. Like these are my top 3 signs when I'm starting to get a little bit stressed. And then when you notice those, that's the time to start implementing some of the strategies to reduce the stress.
That's so interesting. So how much control do we have over the things that stress us out then? And also too, do we have any kind of control over what our physiological reaction to it is? Like, is that something that, what determines if you have a digestive issue and I get a headache or what? Is that something that is directly correlated to how we're responding, or can we control that at all?
Well, I think so. Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think we're all hardwired to carry our stress in different places. So that's, the unique wonder of being humans. But I think what we can do is start to control our physiological reaction to the stress, right? So, very often, like for me, when I get stressed, I can feel my shoulders hunch up. So as soon as I notice that, it's like, okay, great. Thank you for sending me the signal that I'm stressed. And now I get to do something about it, right? So I get to go for a walk. I get to relax my shoulders. I get to take a few deep breaths, right? Because when we notice the physiology, that's where we can make the change. So I think that that's a really important piece. And, I know you asked like, how much control do we have over what's stressing us out? And, really, I think we have very little control over the events that happen in our lives, but we have all the control in the world over how we respond to them. And that's where our power really lies.
Are there maybe a couple of different things that you recommend people do if they're first kind of starting off on this journey of wanting to better control their reactions to stress? If there's, maybe there's someone who gets very stressed out very frequently, or is kind of high strung and is easily triggered by things. Are there maybe a couple of techniques or things that you think are kind of like universally recommended when it comes to trying to practice a different way?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things. One of the things that I always suggest to ask yourself in that moment is, how much is this going to matter to me in 5 years? Because it just puts everything in perspective, right? It's like, in the moment when you're super stressed out, it's like, oh yeah, you know what? In 5 years, I'm not even going to remember this, right? It's going to be nothing. So it's not actually worth me getting so worked up about. So that's like a mindset thing. But I think the thing that I have just become such a proponent of is something called box breathing, which is an actual physical thing that you can do. And it's ultimately just about taking deep breaths, right? So so you basically take a breath for 4 seconds. You inhale for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, you exhale for 4 seconds, and then you hold for 4 seconds. And even just going through that cycle once or twice has such an impact in the moment of, basically what it does is it calms our entire system down because we're getting more oxygen to our brain, which is calming the brain down and allowing us to think more clearly, right? And, I always say to people, it's like getting stressed is the worst thing we can do to actually help us solve the problem, right? We don't think clearly when we're stressed out. So when we can take a step back and go, okay, like how much is this really going to matter? Right. And, I often do too, like, on the grand scheme of my life today, right now, is this worth me having a heart attack over? Like, because we know that's what this is ultimately going to result in, right? So just kind of go, okay, give myself a little perspective, and then also take some deep breaths or do some box breathing to really start to shift that stress response.
And they're seemingly simple things, but I think there's a reason that so many people are still so stressed out, and it's because we don't do them. So I think that's such an awesome I was doing it while you were explaining it. I tried breathing more, and all of a sudden you feel the sense of peace kind of come over you, and you feel any sort of tension that you had holding, you feel it kind of start to melt away. So it really does work. It's so cool.
And it's, even, just taking those deep breaths, like little, maybe you can't figure out the whole box breathing thing, but just taking a couple deep breaths. I remember when my kids were little, they would have all these temper tantrums, and they'd be, and the school had taught them, you need to smell the soup, right? So do a big inhale and then blow on the flowers. No, smell the flowers, blow on the soup, right? So I'd be saying to them, okay, smell the flowers. And I'd be taking these big inhales, and they would just be absolutely losing it. They wouldn't do it at all, right? But for me, I was like, whoa, this is making a big difference. I'm able to be calm in this moment. Like, this is working. So just the little things. And I think, you said it, it's like, we know what to do, but sometimes we don't do it. And I think that's habits, right? And especially with how we respond to stress, we have a habit of how we respond to stress. And it's usually formed in childhood, right? It's from watching the people around us and how they respond to stress. So we need to replace our kind of high stress response habits with some of those like calm Zen habits. Like, okay, you know what? First thing I'm gonna do right now is take a couple deep breaths. Next thing I'm gonna do is ask myself, how much does this really matter? Is this worth having a heart attack over? Right? So a couple little tweaks that we make, and when we start to implement them as habits, that's when we start to see the shift.
That's awesome. I love talking about habits too. Can you explain more about how habits do play a role here? I guess both in managing stressors, but also in whether or not we're truly being productive too, because that's obviously the other part of everything that we'll be talking about with your new book that just came out too. So how do habits impact both of those? Both of those things.
Well, I mean, habits are huge. And I did obviously a lot of research for the book on habits. And Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, is fantastic if people want to check it out. And what he really does is he explains how habits are formed and how, you'll notice earlier I said, replace that high stress habit with a more positive habit of taking a breath, because what they've found is that it's really hard to break habits. And I think a lot of us think, okay, I'm just going to break this habit. But what we want to do is replace our habits. So, I definitely think that we have a lot of habits in terms of how we respond to stress. For me, my negative habit of responding to stress is to grab the chocolate. For a lot of people I know, for a lot of people I know, it's grab a glass of wine, or, just spend a lot of time complaining about it or venting about it or, talking about it. But those are actually negative habits that increase our stress long-term, right? So it's, again, each of us has our own unique way that we're going to respond to the stress and our own unique habits. So we've got to recognize what is that habit of how we respond, and then what can I replace it with? So, for me, I got really good at, like, every time I wanted chocolate, I would grab an apple. Because apples, like, apparently have the same effect as caffeine, and they wake you up and they're really good, right? So I got really good at, okay, here's my replacement. And then every once in a while I'll give myself a treat, but not as a response to stress, but just as a treat of having the chocolate, because I've then created the new habit. So I think in terms of stress, you just need to recognize, what is the way that I respond to stress, right? What's my go-to? And all of us have our go-tos. And what's a healthier way that I could replace that with, right? And that's, obviously I have tons of strategies in the book, but once we recognize that we've got a negative habit and we replace it, then we're in a better state. And then, in terms of productivity, holy, like the habits that we are in, generally, I'd say 80% of the population is in practicing habits that actually interfere with our productivity and that make us less productive. And, part of that is societal, right? It's like this belief that if we work super hard and if we work really long hours, we're going to be more productive. But research has actually found that if you're working more than I think it's 50 hours a week, not only does your productivity fall off a cliff, but it has negative impacts on your health. You're more likely to be obese. You're more likely to get cancer. Has negative impacts on your relationship. You're like 3 times more likely to be divorced. So, we have all these terrible habits around our productivity. A lot of people think also they hold up multitasking as the height of productivity. But, there's this scientist, Harold Pashler, who did some research, and he found that when we're multitasking, if people try to do 2 tasks at once, their cognitive capacity drops from that of a Harvard MBA to an 8-year-old.
Oh my gosh.
It's huge. And you think about how we relate to our phones. How often are we multitasking? Right?
Wow, that's actually scary.
It is really scary. So I think, to me, if we can stop multitasking, right? And if we can change our relationships with our phones and our computers and the notifications that we're always getting, because that pulls us away from tasks. And it, I know we're heading into the productivity stuff, but when we switch tasks, and this, when I read this study, I was like, oh my God, I need to do something different, right? So what they found was that even having our phones on our desks when we're working reduces our productivity by 30%.
Wow. And with that, I'm going to move my phone over there.
I started turning my phone off and putting it in a drawer, because I realized, like, I used to always have it out, right? It's like, it's here. I notice when it pings, I check things. But what the research found was that people switch activities on an average of 3 minutes. 3 minutes, right? And a lot of that is our phones pinging and popping up, or our email notifications. And, you think, oh, it's not that big a deal, right? I'll check my text, or I'll check that email, and then I'll go back to what I'm working on. But it was Gloria Mark who did this research, and she also found it takes an average of 23 minutes to get back to whatever we were doing. So you think about what we're losing in productivity there. It's huge. And then the other thing that they found in that same study was that the more interruptions we have, the more stressed out we are. We're more frustrated. We're unable to get things done, and we're feeling more stressed out. So, I just feel like, honestly, if we just put our phones away, even for like an hour or two when we're doing our really focused, concentrated work, that multitasking and that distraction is going to be gone.
Well, because it doesn't let us get into a state of flow. So everyone ends up kind of on that surface level of work, never actually hitting that deepest point of creativity and being in the zone, so to speak. So, Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're not doing deep thinking either, which is really, really important. I mean, not just for us, but for whatever projects or work we're working on. And we're just not getting as much done. And that's, when I think back to a lot of the clients that I work with, where they were like, I have to stay till 8 at night, or have to stay till 10 at night, because I'm in these meetings all day and I just don't get stuff done. And I was like, look, there's a few things that you can do, right? You schedule, and every client I worked with, I was like, you schedule 1 hour of closed door time every day, and you put your phone away, and you turn your notifications off, and you get your work done. And what I would often say to people is, try and do that early in the day, because our attention and our focus and our decision making, all that gets used up throughout the day. It's limited. So when we can actually do our most important work early in the day, we get a lot more done, right? You get way more done from 9 to 10 a.m. than you do from like 7 to 8 p.m. when you're exhausted and your brain is done, right? And the other thing that I force my clients to do, and it's hilarious because they hate me for it for like 2 days. And then they're like, oh my God, you changed my life. Which is to take breaks every 90 minutes, right? So the research, Tony Schwartz wrote a great book called The Way We're Working Isn't Working. And his research found that we cycle through every 90 minutes. And if we can take a break every 90 minutes, just a quick 10-minute break, we recharge our energy. And then we're way more productive throughout the day, and we're way less stressed throughout the day as well. So, I get people to actually put it in your calendar, like make it pop up. And when I was writing my book, I found this research and I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. And I went from like where, it would take me a week and it would be exhausting and I would be so done at the end of the week in terms of, just my brain, because when you're writing, as you know, right, it's like a lot of focus and attention. So it'd take me, like a week to get through, 10 pages. And then when I started implementing the breaks, not only was I way faster, right? So I could get through 10 pages in like a couple of days, but again, that deep thinking, I could slip into it way more easily because my brain wasn't exhausted anymore. I always say it's like you would never expect your body to go for 8 hours without a break, right? You just wouldn't. You can't run for 8 hours without stopping and taking a break and eating and drinking. It's exactly the same thing for your brain. You need to give it a break. And when you do, you're actually more productive. And so, I have so many clients who don't stop and take lunch. And once I forced them to stop and take lunch, they were like, I have recharged my energy and my afternoons are so much more productive. I don't have to stay late anymore. I'm getting everything done. It's a huge, huge, easy thing to implement that makes a huge impact.
Well, and it's interesting too, because it almost feels like in society nowadays, it's like a badge of honor to just work without breaks. But it's actually just a lot of bad habits being reinforced that have all of these negative side effects. So it's I wonder where it came from, where it became something glorified to just be a workaholic and hustle all of the time, where somewhere along the line, all of these good habits were lost and people forgot the benefit in rest.
Yes, absolutely. And I totally agree. I think we're caught up in this cultural norm of, if I'm busy, I'm important. And I think that we need to let go of that thinking, right?
Because busy is not productive.
No, and busy drains us, right? And then we have no energy left for the people in our lives that we really love, right? We get home at the end of the day and we're exhausted and we're wrecked and we're not able to connect with what we're really passionate about or the people that we really love. And that is no way to live a life, right? You're not thriving when you're doing that.
Definitely not.
I really, really think we need to switch. Absolutely. Exactly what you said. Busy isn't productive. So let's focus on being productive. And, it's been interesting for me, some of the clients that work in these places where there is this culture of like, no, you don't take breaks. Right. And so we've had to work with that culture and they've had to say, you know what? The research has found that when I take the break, I actually get way more done. And I'm experiencing that too, and watch my outputs. And once people see the outputs, then they see the difference. And once people see, you know what, she's working till 5 every night and she's getting more done, then they're like, oh, maybe I want to try that. I think I might take a lunch break too.
What do you think is the number one thing that keeps people unproductive? Is there one standout productivity killer that you see from all of the different clients and companies that you come in contact with?
Well, it's tricky. I mean, I think on a personal level, I think it's our phones and our relationship with our phones and our ability to distract ourselves, right? Like that's what I just see people doing over and over. You check your email 27 times in 3 hours because you can, right? That's not productive. It's not actually helping you get where you need to get to. And then in terms of an organizational level, what I see is this culture of meetings. And, like people book their entire day of meetings and then they can't get any work done. So, which is why, again, I really encourage people to just book an hour for themselves every day. And, one of my favorite techniques is called a Pomodoro.
I love Pomodoro.
Yeah, they're so great, right? So you basically, it's a sprint, right? And you set yourself a timer, and for 25 minutes, you just work and you have no interruptions and you go, go, go. And you'll get so much more done in that time, right? And then you're supposed to take a 5-minute break, and then you can do a couple more if you've got time. But, I always say to my clients, I'm like, if you can get one of those done in a day, 25 minutes of focused attention where you're not checking your phone, you've turned your email notifications off, you're not interrupted, right? I think that allowing ourselves to be interrupted is one of the biggest productivity impacts that there is out there.
I've also heard it said, or I was talking to one of my girlfriends about this, how dangerous meetings are, because oftentimes it's just such busy work. And we came to the conclusion, we said, it would really be most beneficial if every single meeting came with a desired end result, where it was, okay, the meeting is scheduled, and by the end of the meeting, this is what we will know or do, or this is the action step to move forward. Because so often people just have these meetings filling their Google Calendar, and then you end the meeting and you're like, well, we're in the same place we were when we started. So it's such a waste of time, right? Like, what was the point? So it's like, go into the meeting already knowing what you're working to achieve, because that will keep everybody aligned on the same page, where you're actually being productive in some way, because you have to go from point A to point B, and you got to do something to get there.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing people need to do is question whether they even need a meeting about it.
Yeah.
Right? Because often it can be a quick email, or it can be a 5-minute conversation, right? You don't always need. So it's like, think about, as you say, what's the desired outcome? What's the purpose here? Do we need the meeting, and who needs to be in the meeting? Because I see so many people get pulled into meetings that they don't need to be there, right? So it's like, really, we need to dial it back and think through, how do we make our meetings effective, and how do we not meet when we don't need to? And I think, now with so many people working from home, I'm seeing it more and more where it's like, okay, we'll just stack it with meetings. It's like, this isn't effective, right? So figure out when you need to meet, who needs to be there, and as you say, what the desired outcome is.
Mm-hmm. So bringing the two ideas together, stress and productivity, you obviously just came out with your book, Working Well, 12 Simple Strategies to Manage Stress and Increase Productivity. Can you walk listeners through a few of your favorites?
Yeah, I have so many favorites. But one of the ones that I talked about earlier was the taking breaks, right? It's such an easy, simple one. And I will say that a true break is where you're off your screens. So you don't just take a break and sit in your chair and look at your phone, right? But you actually get off a screen. Ideally, you go for a walk or get a little bit of movement, and you have like a glass of water, right? So things that are good for your body. One of the things that came up for me in the research, which it really shifted my mindset in a big way, was a book by Sean Aker called The Happiness Advantage. And, I see you know it.
It's a great book.
But it really, really, it shifted my mindset, right? Because basically what he found was that happier people get better outcomes in absolutely every aspect of their life, right? They get more promotions, they get more sales, they're better doctors, they're better at whatever they do, they're better at the relationships. They found that when we're happy, we're 31% more productive, and our stress is reduced by 23%. So when people ask me, like, what are strategies? I'm like, you know what? You just have to focus on looking after yourself and doing the things that make you happy. And if you can do that stuff, right, you come to work energized, you come to work full. And, some of the research-based strategies that help us, kind of create more happiness in our life. One of the ones that I love, that I implement into all my meetings, and I've implemented it with my family, and is to identify 3 things that you're grateful for every day. So really thinking through and looking at specifically what 3 things went well today that you're feeling grateful for. And it's a way of retraining our brains, because our brains are hardwired to seek out the risks, right? This is, again, how we have survived. It's neuroscience. So it's really easy for us to all day long go through and see what's not working well, and what's stressing us out, and what's, causing us some stress and some anxiety. It's a lot harder for us to look and see what's going well. But when we can start to retrain our brains by just every single day focusing on 3 things that went well, that we're happy about, that feel good, right? That starts to shift our energy, and it also retrains our brain to look for what's going well. The other thing that I really, really work with everyone that I work with on is that focus on relationships. Because the research has found, right, that having the quality and the strength of our relationships protects us from mental health issues, from physical health issues, and it leads to a long, healthy, happy life. So I feel like at work so often we're so busy and we're so focused on just getting stuff done. But when we have really good, strong working relationships, it actually helps us be way more productive, and it helps us enjoy work more, which makes us happier, which makes us get more done, right? So I really, really encourage people to just, focus. Like I have a course on, strengthening your working relationships, because it's the thing that we don't focus on. And it's one of the things that's super important.
So how can people boost their productivity without also boosting their stress? Like if a listener maybe struggles with the connection between the two and automatically starts to feel their heart beat a little faster if their output is increased, or maybe if the expectation of their output is increased, is there a way to straddle the two and make them more mutually exclusive?
It's such a good question, and it's such a good it's a challenge that we have, right? And when I was writing the chapters on productivity and on working with your brain and on neuroscience, I was like, oh no, is this going to stress people out? Right? It's like exactly what I don't want to do. But what I always come back to is when we reduce our stress, we're 31% more productive, right? And I really believe that if we're working well, we're working from a place of ease. We're working from a place where we're relaxed, where we're filled up, where we're not super anxious and stressed out and pushing and putting all that pressure on ourselves. So a lot of it is a mindset, and is using, all these strategies to help you reduce and manage your stress, because then you're naturally more productive. And if we're super stressed out, we can't think clearly. We're not able to be as productive as we want. But a lot of the things that I teach are things that do straddle the two, right? So, if you meditate every morning just for 10 minutes, and, like I said, when I first heard about it, I first tried it, I was like, I can't do this. It's so weird. And this was, God, this was before phones and apps, right? Now there's so many amazing apps, right? There's Smiling Mind or Calm or Headspace. They've all got all these free guided meditations. If you do that for just 10 minutes every morning, not only does it reduce your stress and kind of strengthen your ability to handle whatever emotional stuff comes at your way throughout the day, it also increases your ability to focus and to concentrate. So it's doing both, right? It's the same with like taking breaks. If you take a break, you're reducing your stress and you're going to go back feeling more productive. I think that we just want to focus on productivity, because we're so panicked about getting everything done. But the other thing that I really work with people around productivity is again, because we have so much coming at us, if we identify every single day our top 3 priorities, right, we've got something to focus on and to work towards, and we feel less stressed at the end of the day because we've accomplished them. So they have to be achievable, right? And I'm saying especially now with everything going on in the world, it's like you want to make these super achievable so that at the end of the day you tick them off, which gives you some momentum, which inspires you to keep going. And you want to tick them off. You want to actually physically do that because you're celebrating your wins, right? You're going, okay, I did this. I got some stuff done, and it generates the momentum, and that's where we keep going. So, I think there's so many things that we do naturally that increase our stress and that decrease our productivity. And that's why we need to get really conscious about replacing some of those negative habits, right? Stopping the multitasking, stopping checking our phones, stopping just working till 10 every night, because those things, they're actually not helping us. And I think we get into a really negative spiral. A lot of my clients are like, they're working till 10 every night. And when I meet them, they're super stressed out. They're not productive. They're not sleeping well. Their relationships are spiraling down, right? Because they're working till 10 every night. So their home life isn't so great. And again, it's a negative spiral because they're exhausted. So the next day they're not very productive. So they work till 10 again, right? And it's like, it's recognizing this isn't working for me and making the changes that you need to make. And honestly, even if people just do really simple things like start every day with a 10-minute meditation, put their breaks in every 90 minutes and actually get outside and go for a walk and move their bodies, and they put their phones away and they focus on 3 things that they're grateful for, they're like, try those. Please ask people to let you know how it goes, and then let me know, because the impacts of just doing those little things are massive, right? That will decrease stress and increase productivity naturally, just doing all those things.
Which is amazing, because like we said before, so many times people won't do these super simple things that are right in front of our faces. But it's like, hey, if it's easy, I mean, would you rather it be something super difficult or super expensive or super time consuming? Like, no, take the easy win and make it happen, because if the impact is that huge, why the heck not?
And, on that note, when we don't do the easy stuff, then that's when it does get hard, right? Like when people have come to me, often they have big relationship issues. They have big health issues, right? It's like, like I said, we want to be proactive and catch it when things are easy to do, and it is easy to turn them around. Mm-hmm. So there's obviously tons more strategies in the book that are very specific and easy. And I called it 12 simple strategies because I wanted people to know, like, it is really easy if you do it. You just got to start doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I have to note, Working Well is listed as a must read for anyone wanting to thrive at work, no matter how difficult their manager or their coworkers might be. So super relevant to all of our friends listening on the Thrive podcast right now for thriving in the workplace. So make sure you pick up a copy on Amazon when you're done listening to this episode. So Stephanie, I want to close out by asking you 2 things that I ask all guests who come on the Thrive podcast. And that is, what does thrive mean to you? And how do you strive to thrive in your own everyday life?
A great question. And I love what you're doing with your podcast, because you're giving people the resources to thrive, right? And I think for me, it's living what I'm passionate about, right? So finding my passion and living it and doing it to the best of my ability, and letting it be the thing that fills me and stopping before it drains me, right? Because everything can be taken too far, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like letting that passion be what fills me, and then using that energy to also connect with the other things that fill me in my life, right? My kids, my husband, my friends, my writing, reading books, doing yoga, like doing the things that I love. So I think that's, and how I strive to thrive is to just do it, right? And I know it sounds simple, but it's like, sometimes it is so hard. It feels so hard to get up in the morning and meditate for 10 minutes. It feels so hard to take a break and actually go for a walk. It feels so hard to pick up the phone and call a friend and say, I'm having a tough day. But those are the things you have to do, right? That's how you thrive, to be vulnerable enough and to push yourself and to care enough about yourself to be able to do those things.
And on that note, that was excellent. So where can people find you online?
So I'm kind of all over the place, but I'm not as good at online stuff as many people are. So my website is managetoengage.com. So just spelled the words, managetoengage.com. On Facebook, you can find me at Stephanie Berryman. On Instagram, I'm at Stephanie Berryman Author. And I know I have a Twitter account, but I don't even know what it is. And I can't figure Twitter out. So yeah, that's me online. And then of course my book is on Amazon. If you just look up Working Well, that's there as well. Some of my other books.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being on Thrive today. And everyone, be sure to pick up your copy of Working Well on Amazon or wherever you get your books.
Thanks so much.
Wait, before you go, if you like what you just listened to, drop us 5 stars on iTunes. Make sure you're subscribed to never miss an episode of Thrive. And if you're on Instagram, snap a screenshot and share to your story with what episode you're tuning into, and tag me at Erica Lagenza with what part resonated with you the most. That way I can see what's helping you, and your friends can pick up a helpful tidbit too. Thanks for tuning in. It's your time to thrive.